I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Hannah Elliott, and this is Hot Pursuit.
All right, we have a lot of cool stuff to talk about on today's show. Number one, we're going to talk about the collector car market because, Hannah, you've written a piece about maybe some of the high-end Ferrari prices are going to soften a little bit and some American muscle maybe has room to grow.
Yes, you could say that.
We're also going to talk about your Porsche drive. You've driven yet another amazing P car, and I want to get some info from you because you know so much about the company and collecting about what people could get into for a reasonable price now in terms of P cars.
I got a few ideas.
Then we're going to talk about the EV kind of backlash because it was breakneck pace in terms of the growth, sales growth, investment of more than $100 billion in this decade. And now we're seeing production get cut and big losses. So it looks like that's turning around in a big way. So let's do it. We'll kick it off with the collector car market. I used to watch all the time Barrett Jackson and Mecum auctions as a kid on whatever cable channel because nothing was on cable except for that, and loved it. But I'm not that in touch with it anymore because I feel like most of the vehicles that I would want are way too expensive.
Yes, I think this is a common thing for all of us. In the years since the pandemic, we've seen record volumes of cars being sold, record sales across many brands, BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, Ferrari. It's been this bonanza. And 2023 has really been the first year where everything has just calmed down a bit, which sounds, when you say the market's cooling, it sounds a little negative. But actually what I'm hearing is this is actually good news for people like us who might just want to own one or two interesting cars, and we're not going to speculate on it. We just want to buy something fun and drive it.
I mean, you could also say that inflation has come down, which is true, but that doesn't change the massive rise in prices that hasn't and isn't going to turn around, right? So in terms of the higher end cars, the Ferraris, the rarer Porsches, anything with a race provenance, these prices are going to stay where they are, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's no sure thing in the car market, but if there's something close, it's Ferrari. This is really the blue chip brand, the blue chip vehicle of car collecting. Last year, the average price of a Ferrari slipped from 1.3 million to 1.2 million. So yeah, they came off a little bit, but they're still very expensive. And, they're going to sell. I think 90% of Ferraris sold last year compared to 80% average in the market. So they're going to sell. There's a little bit of a cooling, but if you want to have kind of a sure bet, Ferrari's the way to go. And yes, they're expensive, but there are a couple of ways you can get into the brand. I'm talking about something like the Ferrari FF, which we kind of touched on last week.
I love it. It's the four-seater. It's a 2+2.
Yeah, it's a 2+. It's got a V12 engine. It's got all the makings
all-wheel drive.
Exactly, of what makes a great Ferrari. It's unexpected.
No manual option.
No, and that's a shame, unfortunately.
I wonder why the people at Ferrari put that to bed. I mean, wouldn't you love to have a gated shifter even in a new Ferrari?
Yes. Yeah, I think you would. And what I hear from analysts who talk about the collecting market is the reason why the FF is growing in popularity is because it's easy to drive. And a lot of the younger buyers don't want to mess around with gated shifters. There's more to break. There's more to go wrong. It's not as fun and easy and carefree to drive in traffic. So that's actually what I hear is that's working in its advantage in terms of attracting.
So the FF is easier to drive. I can't imagine a Ferrari Dino is that difficult to drive because I think of it as a smaller car. I mean, it was a smaller car, right?
Absolutely. This was the V6 Ferrari that actually it didn't get a lot of respect back in the day. Of course, it was famously named after Enzo's son who died, and it didn't get respect. It was kind of seen as not a real Ferrari. But this is another example of Dinos are going to be a lot less expensive than the 250 racing Ferraris from back in the 60s and 50s. So it's another opportunity. Yeah, they're kind of expensive now, but they probably will still continue to gain value.
So an FF, I've been looking, so I know that you can get into them for less than $100,000, but it's going to be around that mark for a good one, right? A low mileage, well taken care of, maybe a one-owner vehicle. In terms of the Dino, what kind of price are you talking about? Because it's from the from the 70s, right? So you're not going to probably find a one-owner vehicle, and they're not going to be $1 million, but they still are probably going to be, what, $100,000?
I think they're closer to $500,000. I'm looking right now on Haggerty. One in good condition is $470,000. That's the average price. So we're still. This is all still very rare air.
Yes.
A half. Again, like, we're not talking about cheap buys. We're talking about buys that will probably still gain a little bit in value. So if you invest $500,000, you might make a little bit on that. But there are a lot of cheaper things that, if you have an open mind. Now, I know we want to talk about Porsche. I don't really think
the
that
Dino, by the way, I'll interject that I think the Dino, I'm looking at the picture in your story, kind of looks like a 904 a little bit. Do you get that vibe?
Totally. Yeah. And I think it looks awesome. I've always thought they looked really. And the great thing about the Dino, for whatever reason, they seem to have come in really interesting colors. People were a lot freer in speccing them than, with other, like a Daytona. I mean, you just see red for Ferrari. But with the Dino, I feel like you really see cool oranges and greens and yellows and blues, and so I like that. I think it's actually more interesting in a way.
Still impossible for most people to afford or even consider. And it's so sad because I remember I totally crushed on the Magnum Ferrari. I think it was a 308 that he had. I can't remember, 308 or 328. But I remember when those were going for 25 or 30 grand, and I seriously thought about getting one. I remember when a Countach was going for 25 or 30 grand. Nobody wanted them.
Well, go ahead.
And now they're impossible to afford. Even like an E39 M5, which is like, an internet car lover's car, is growing in value so much. Even like a
930 turbo. Those were 20 grand cars.
Well, that's a Steve McQueen car. That's.
But 15 years ago, you could get those for 20 grand. I know somebody who got quite a few of them for 20 grand back in the day, and now they're $300,000.
I actually saw yesterday on Auto Trader I think it was a early 2000s Cayman R. That was $100,000.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's the R model, and they didn't make 1,000 of them, but still, it's insane, the prices. What is there that we can afford?
Okay, let's talk a little more down to reality. Yeah. Let's talk about the Ford Thunderbird. I know you like your Detroit cars.
Love them.
So this is, from the mid 60s, and what I'm hearing is the Lincoln Continentals have become so popular, they got really expensive, and they've kind of priced out themselves. So now if people were interested in a Continental but couldn't really afford it, now maybe you should look at a Thunderbird because it's going to be a lot more affordable. You can get one for like maybe $40,000, and they're kind of from the same era. And the big theme here is be interested in cars that deliver unique experiences. That's going to really serve you well. Like, first, you should generally just really like the car for yourself. And then second, look for something that's super unique and from a particular point in time. And the Thunderbird really accomplishes that.
Well, not everybody loves anymore. By the way, in terms of the Lincoln Continental, I bet you I've mentioned this before, but there's a movie called Hit and Run.
Okay. Who's in it?
Dax Shepard. And
you have mentioned it.
Kristen Bell.
I watched it.
Did you watch it?
No. But
oh my God, it's so good.
I just can't. Those names don't
Bradley
really
Cooper's
do
in
it for me. I do like. Silver Linings Playbook is one of my all-time favorite movies.
There's a Cadillac CTS-V wagon, manual wagon that he drives.
This is not doing anything.
There's
for
a Corvette Z06. There's a Lincoln Continental that Dax Shepard in the movie, like he and his dad restored it. It's a very good car movie, and I think it's a great movie. So what I'm noticing is the Thunderbird, right? It's the one that you don't want. You want the Continental. If I look at the BMW M3, I want the E46 M3. I don't want the E92
You
M3.
want the E92. Look, it's going to come up. This is the smart man's buy. You got to just buy it and hold it and wait. That, like, imagine the Dino that you almost bought, but you didn't. The E92 in particular, you can get one for like $50,000 now. The rest of the BMW M3 market has gone up, double-digit percentages. This is the one. This is the smart one.
I don't know. For me, the at this point, the kidneys look too tiny, you know?
Oh, is that what that is? I was going to say, what didn't you like about it?
Because now I've gotten used to the ugly, gigantic kidneys that I think they're too small. And the whole front end looks like someone pinched it.
This is just like women's bodies. You know,
I'm not going there.
I will go there.
I have no view.
It's like, this reminds me of Heroin Chic when everyone said Kate Moss was too small because she came out. The supermodels were these like voluptuous women, and then we go down to Kate Moss, and now we're back in the Kardashian era. It's all relative. You know, it's all like whatever is the trend is
Let's
the
say
trend.
hemlines. Let's say hemlines. Because then we don't touch on anybody.
Who has a hem these days?
Let's talk about the Porsche that you drove, because I also want to get into Porsches that are still possible to buy for regular people. But the one you drove looked awesome. I saw your pictures on Instagram, and they tore out, obviously, the interior, and they made it into it's a race, like an off-road race vehicle, right?
Yes. So I have to be really careful because I cannot give driving impressions of this vehicle until next Tuesday, and that is when our actual coverage will come out. So look forward to that.
But just what is it?
Yeah, you know? the car itself is named Edith, and it's based on a 911 and 992 Carrera 4S that Porsche basically Frankensteined into a rock crawler. This is not a 911 Dakar. This is not some safari Baja style 911 that goes fast over sand. This is a rock crawler, max speed 60 miles an hour, 7-speed manual. And you can barely even move forward in first gear. I mean, you could really start the car in second gear and be fine. So this is about going slow over very, very, very rough, uneven terrain. And this is the car that they claim the world record for the highest altitude crossed by a vehicle. This was on a mountain in Chile. Now, that record has not been certified by Guinness. Porsche is working to have it certified. It's unclear to me why they didn't do that preemptively.
Yeah.
That will be discussed in further detail in my piece. But they're going to call it a world record now. And the car itself looks so cool.
It does look awesome. So it's made for like maximum articulation and, pulling power.
Exactly. And they even pulled some of the axle components from the 919 that they had developed back in the day for that race car and actually never used. So they're pulling old stuff to build on top of this 992 Carrera 4S. It's a very cool idea. They're not selling them. They're not making any more. It's a one-of-one thing that they just wanted to do to get the record. And I can't say much.
Well, no, you don't have to say much more about it. But I will say, when I looked at your Instagram posts, I always complain about the fact that the Dakar is so expensive and unattainable, even though it's like that would be the perfect commuting Porsche for many people who live in cities like this.
Yes.
And I'm sure like that. And I looked at your pictures and thought, you could just safari your own. Like Matt Farah is the first one that I saw when he did that to his. Do you see a lot of people doing that? Or is that a trend that has stuck with us, or was it just a few people in the...
Well, it's a huge trend, especially in California. I mean, to Baja, like a Baja Bug or a Baja 911 is not unusual at all. There's a guy out here named TJ Russell who is building basically Baja style 911s that can go fast like the Dakar, but can also rock crawl. Lee Tuttle's another one. So there are companies that will do it for you. Basically, you give them the car and then they will spec it for you and make it really capable. And more people should do it. That's the great thing about Porsches. The components are so interchangeable. You can chop them up and move things around, and it's kind of all the same car.
But the problem is now, like if I want to buy a 911 and take it to Tuttle, I have to be like, a rock star or a pro wrestler or something.
I think the wait list is several years on that one.
But even to get, can you still get an old 80s Carrera? Everyone talks about the G50. They really want that transmission. Or can you still get like a 964 in good shape for less than, $80,000-$90,000?
No. I think those days are really over. And I do think, again, when I spoke with analysts from K500, which is a great data firm based in Europe, among Haggerty, Classic Car, all of those guys are saying, look, the 964 in particular probably will gain a little bit more value, and the 993. There's some room to grow, but already both of those are over $100,000 models.
Sad.
And those are like the cheapest you could find. Like the days of the turbos being $20,000 are, I mean, shoot, you used to be able to go to Pomona Swap Meet out here in California and get like a 911T for $7,500 on the regular.
Or a 996 turbo. That was...
Yeah. And, you know, they even had engines in them. These were running, driving cars. And so I do really think that those days, unfortunately, are over.
So what do you think is the most attainable of, I mean, I guess a 997, people haven't gone crazy for those yet, right?
Here's the thing. I think that if you are willing to buy a high mileage 911, you can get a great deal. For instance, we at home have a 991 Turbo S with over 180,000 miles on it. And that's the daily. That's what I drove here today. I drive it often. It's got 180,000 miles. We got it for pennies on the dollar. And that used to be the top of the line. It's a 2014. It was the top of the line.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so
One time I spoke with Wolfgang Porsche, and I asked him which one he would buy if he could have
Did he say that one?
He said a Turbo S, and I thought it was such a boring answer, but
no,
I get it.
If I was going to have a new 911 right now, I'd have the 992 Turbo S. And the daily right now is a 991 Turbo S.
So I think the high mileage thing is interesting, and I hadn't really thought about it. Every time I look for a car, like probably everybody else, I limit the mileage. But I saw that guy Paul Kramer has a rally, like a 1986
oh my gosh, it's
Carrera,
the coolest car.
And he apparently bought it with 200,000 miles on it, and now has like over 300,000 miles on it. So do you see Porsches with like high mileage doing well?
Yes.
I mean, are they just reliable cars if you take care of them?
Well, yeah. There's a friend. I've got a friend out in Florida who drives his 356 cross country and has for years. I need to check back in, but I know he's probably in the 200,000 to 300,000 miles on his 356. I don't see why it's a bad thing. To me, a car with super low miles, I'm like, hasn't really been tried and tested, has it?
Right.
But Paul's a great guy. That green car, I think that's the one you're talking about.
Yes.
That he's got.
The Turtle, La Tortuga.
Exactly. He drives it everywhere, and I think I'm actually going to see him on Saturday. He's got a little gathering down at his shop. But to me, high mileage, if the car's been maintained, I think the important thing is how many owners has it had? What are the maintenance records like? Where did it live? Is this car in Detroit or is it in, Santa Barbara?
Let's move to the world of EVs because, we've been talking about this a bunch, but I think dark clouds have really moved in here. There was massive growth in 2022. Annual EV sales in the U.S. grew 60%. Last year, they only grew 47%. But in the fourth quarter of last year, EV sales only grew 1.3%. And analysts at UBS expect growth this year to only be 11%. So they're still growing EV sales, in the U.S. and globally. But the growth has slowed down drastically, and that's because I think all the rich people have bought them, as a third car, or an eco warrior, God bless them, have bought them to do their part. But everybody else thinks they're too expensive, and you can't find a place to charge them, and they're just not convenient.
It's really interesting to see. You sent me a bunch of these great reporting that Bloomberg reporters have done on this topic, and it's kind of unbelievable how there's just a hard component of American consumers that are like, no, we're not considering EVs. We don't want them. I think one of the reports you sent me, Matt, said about half of Americans just say flat out not interested in EVs.
Right. Well,
and that's new.
I thought about getting an EV for my wife. I mean, we have for our family because we want to, offset the carbon footprint that my Challenger creates. And there are incentives, mind you. You know, the government has taken it upon themselves to take money from taxpayers, from all of us, and try and subsidize this. Not just the U.S. government, right? Governments around the world are using taxpayer money to try and subsidize the EV industry. So you want to do it. I look at BMW, for example, has the iX, which is ugly but cool.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's also expensive, right? It's $80,000, $90,000 to start. The X5, the gas version, tried and true, starts at less than $70,000. However, if you lease it from BMW, you can lease the iX for far cheaper, $699 a month, whereas an X5 lease is over $900 a month. So there are ways to get into them for less, which makes me think, okay, maybe I should. I can do my part for the earth, and I'm going to save money. But the problem is all the Electrify America places around me are broken or are full. I would have to install extra equipment at my house and give up some garage space. I don't want to do that. And then Consumer Reports recently took a survey and found that EVs have 80% more problems than ICE cars. What?
That seems wild because EVs have far fewer components.
That's exactly what I thought.
So how does that even
So the
work?
problem is all down to the battery and the ability to take a charge. That's what Consumer Reports
like a
says.
cell phone.
Yes. And that's the most reported problem for battery electric vehicles, that even if you pull up to, your supercharger or whatever, the battery in your car or something in between the charger and your battery isn't working well enough to charge you up. And if you had a problem with your car where you couldn't put gas in it for some reason, that would be no bueno, right?
Yeah, that honestly is a terrifying scenario for me. And it's definitely, even on press cars, we joke about it at home, I get so anxious about, like, if the tank quote unquote, shows a quarter or less of range, I won't drive the car because I don't believe that it's a mile to mile exact,
it
ratio.
Isn't.
No,
a lot
it's
of times
not at
I'll
all.
get into a car and it says, you have 200 miles of range.
No,
I put the pedal
not.
down, I get on the, Sprainbrook, and then all of a sudden it says, wait, you have 120 miles.
I know. That is honestly terrifying. And the other thing is, I'll take cars up Angeles Crest up here, Highway 2. And when you're going uphill, clearly you use a lot more battery, especially if you're pushing it a bit. And yes, I know in my head that when I come down, the brakes will regenerate some power. I know that logically.
Right.
But when I'm driving up the hill and I can literally just watch range dwindle in front of my eyes, it's terrifying.
Yeah, so
I don't like it.
No, I think that range anxiety that you're talking about, the fact that the charging network is terribly poor. By the way, I saw in a story, because the government is now going to give even more money, I think another $700 million to try and improve the charging infrastructure. But the first federally funded chargers just went into
it's unbelievable
use in Ohio, I think in November or December. In Ohio first, and then New York just now, like last month, which is crazy.
Too little, too late. I mean, it's and the other thing that reminds me of, I saw that China, I think, is a really big, important thing to talk about when we're talking about EVs, because that's basically where everything exciting is happening with EVs. But back to your point about the government, there's still like a 25 or 27% tariff on bringing in Chinese electric vehicles into the country, which is why we don't have any.
Yes.
And the Chinese vehicles are a lot cheaper, so potentially it would be good. They would be a lot less expensive to buy, but with the tariffs, they're not coming here.
Right. Well, Polestar 2 is one that's made in China, and I've driven here. It's interesting. Italy is now going to give another $1 billion in incentives. Car makers are asking the UK to give now multiple $1 billion in tax cuts. I think almost 9 billion pounds, so well over $10 billion. Governments around the world continue to throw money at this industry and really are trying to subsidize the growth of EVs, but the price remains too high. An average EV cost right now is over $60,000, which is $13,000 more than the average cost for an ICE car. And as a result, they're sitting on dealership lots now for 114 days at the beginning of December, compared to 71 days for the overall auto industry. And then obviously much less for gas cars, and then much less for hybrids, which just fly off the lot. So
That's wild.
It's a problem, and I just wonder, are we now in this lull? Like, after the .com bubble burst, nobody wanted Amazon stock, but if you waited 10 years, you were a happy camper. Is that the case, you think, for EVs? Because we're pouring so much money into it. I talked to the CFO of Volkswagen last week, and he said, we're still going to invest $130 billion in a decade to build EVs and digitalize automotive. You just can't turn that around. It's a very big ship. So even if they seem unpopular now, maybe we get through this storm and there are clear skies ahead?
Well, it seems like, with the amount of money that stands to be lost if they don't take off, I mean, just look at how much governments are now investing and automakers are investing in making them succeed. You're right. I mean, it just seems crazy to just all of a sudden say, never mind. And
you can't. You can't.
No, you can't. And I don't think this is the quote unquote end of EVs. There was still growth in EV sales last year. It just wasn't as much as previous years, but there is still incremental growth. So I think we should keep that in mind. It's not like next year they're just going to disappear.
No, of course not.
There's way too much at stake.
Well, I mean, I had a baby 6 weeks ago. And I'm not enjoying.
Your wife had a baby.
Yes, I'm not. I'm not enjoying the sleepless nights, and all I do is change diapers, and she's crying all the time. But I can't put her back. Like, it's at this point, we're going forward with this child.
Yeah,
that's
a genie. Genie is out of the bottle.
I think it's the same with electric cars. By the way, I will say that I'm driving the F-150 Lightning right now.
Oh, what do you think?
Well, it's very fast.
It's unusual that you wouldn't have mentioned it sooner in the conversation, because typically you start right off telling me about the huge truck you're driving of the week. But this is like the least excited I've seen you be about a truck.
I just think it's not for me. Let's say I'd rather have a gas version. I'd much rather have a big diesel motor in there.
It sounds like you're kind of bored with it.
It's just, it's like a utility.
An appliance.
Sorry. It's like an appliance. It doesn't really ignite any passion in me. And, people at my house are a little bit derisive about the size of the screen. The screen in the middle reminds me of, have you seen Spaceballs?
Not for about 20 years.
But you remember Dark Helmet, right? They're making fun of Darth Vader, and he has the biggest helmet. It's just a ridiculously sized helmet. And that's what the screen and they could have made it half the size, and I still would have had just as much functionality out of it. It seemed almost a joke. But it's fast. It's, useful.
Are people nice to you on the road when you're driving it?
Well, not because of the way I drive,
So you still drive like a real jerk.
Well, it's so quick. I'm like coming down here on the West Side Highway. I'm just weaving in and out of traffic.
Yeah.
Because it's so fast. So there's that. But it's still, I'd much rather have a Super Duty with a 6.7 liter Power Stroke. I mean, I'd rather have a Raptor. Obviously. I'd rather have a Bronco.
Do you find that the bigger the truck, the shorter the man?
Well, I mean, I'm 6'4", so
that's why I asked. You're an anomaly, Matt.
I mean, maybe I'm making up for something. I don't know, but I just like.
I didn't say it. I
like big cars too. That's why I like that big Bentley and the SE rolls, and
I think the Bentleys are going to be popular.
Yeah. No,
already.
And by the way, you can get into those for $20,000.
Yeah.
And
you heard it now. You heard it now.
Yeah.
Go buy them now.
All right, so let's just we've covered our 3 topics. Let's just cast our eyes forward to what's coming up. You've got your coverage on the Porsches coming out. What else have you got?
The coverage on the Porsches coming out. We've got the market look for cars to buy in 2024. Next week, actually, I will be in New York in a week.
Nice.
So I'm excited about that. So I'll come see you. And then I'm going to the Retromobile show in Paris, which I'll be excited about. There are a couple auctions there.
What is that?
French.
Retromobile? What is that?
Retromobile. This is an annual car show in Paris. And I haven't been since before COVID, so I'm really curious to go. It's just like a beautiful old car show. And it's typically held inside, which is great because it is February. Yeah. And then, I'm going to be looking in terms of stories. There is an interesting thing heating up in Florida in March. I'm going to be reporting about how Amelia Island, which is the standard car concours, then will sort of be going up against this new thing called Moto Miami that Arm Sotheby's is putting on. So we can get into that later, but that's something that's also on my horizon.
All right, very cool.
What about you?
I'm going to be driving the Jaguar F-Pace SVR. I almost forgot about Jaguar as a brand entirely.
Yeah, I know.
But it'll be interesting to drive that vehicle because I'm sure it'll be great. It's expensive, and when they're expensive, they're usually fun. My interest in the brand has been kind of reignited a little bit.
In Jag?
Yeah.
Why is that?
I've just heard more and more about older Jags, like XJS doing a thing with TWR. And a buddy of mine bought XJ6 that is pretty cool, and it was like almost free how much he paid for it. And speaking of, the potential growth in cars, I feel like that's a brand a lot of people have forgotten about, and they had some really cool designs.
Oh my gosh, they had the coolest designs. We used to have a couple E-types, and I would drive that E-type back and forth to Sunset Tower, and it was kind of awesome because it's so low to the ground. The cabin is tiny, and if you've ever driven a Gullwing Mercedes, it's basically basically the same feel, but a lot less expensive. So here's another: if you like the Gullwing, but you can't spend a few $1 million, you can get into an E-type, which has sort of the same feel and almost the same body shape. But yeah, I mean, the Jags from the 80s and 90s, they could be cool again, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if this is inappropriate, but I'm looking at you, I'm thinking about Tawny Katane. Remember Tawny Katane?
That is. No.
She was in a Whitesnake video on top of a Jag, and she had the hair.
Cool.
You've got the hair going.
I gotta look her up. Tawny Katane.
That does it for this episode of Hot Pursuit. A reminder, we have a new email address, so you can write into us if you have any comments or questions. Hannah, what's the email address?
The email address is hotpursuit@bloomberg.net.
So definitely shoot us your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Hannah Elliott. And this is Bloomberg.